Welcome to Flat Earth Debate Uncut and After Show. I'm your host Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel, or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon and join button if you'd like to become a Nathan Oakley 1980 channel member and keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you would like to support the channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they premiere, and there's also a PayPal, Patreon and crypto link in the info box below the video. Also below this video you can get £50 for swapping your UK electricity supplier to Octopus Energy, and this is of particular importance if you drive an electric vehicle. Speaking of Patrons, I'm going to do a quick shout out to all of you who do support me on Patreon. So a massive shout out of thanks and appreciation to Rob H, Ben White, Maximum Gravy, Austin Whitsitt, John Kays, Julian Jeremiah, Tommy Swagnuts, Michael Kahn, Patrick Gunnels, Banter, Will Brax, Mel B. Styles, Troy Shuker, Bose Nail, Sampson, Maris, Hairy Blade, Mobile Mac 777, Neo the One, Lost Cat FE, Rob W, Open Minded, Reese Pound, Dal West Watson, Mike, Muted, Dick Earth Skeptic, Maria Neelands, Unbelievable Productions, Blue Ridge Ranger, The Real Gabster, Liam Nedrick Jr., Abraham Mohammed, Adrian Quintana, Skeptic936, Life is Short, theflatearthchannel.com, Texas Mike, and David Wayne Foster. So another massive thank you to all of you for supporting me on Patreon. Now I will hand over to whoever is in Discord and Google so you can enjoy their dulcet tones while I set up for today's live show.
Newton's Principia, and I said Principia, and he said, yeah, like you would know.
It is Principia, but we like to wind him up by calling it the Principia, right?
Yeah. So I thought that was funny. So I came back on. I said, I have you know, I won the spelling bee and the math bee in 8th grade.
Ah, I see. He's the dude.
You know how Adam gets.
I was just going to say hello to the guy in Discord, Colus or something like that. I can never read it at this distance. Cobus.
Cobus, there you go. How you doing?
Very well, good to have you. Hey, John, as well.
Hello.
Hello.
How you say his name? Cobus?
Yeah, Cobus. Bus.
It's a nickname.
Flat Earther? Ball Earther? What's your story?
Flat Earther.
I start.
That's no fun.
That's not the reaction you're supposed to.
Sorry.
He's like moaning that you're not a baller.
It's no fun for me. But you know how Adam gets them little digs in there without you even realizing? That's kind of how he did it. I found it funny. But he made me a nice picture in Master B if you want to check it out.
Of what?
Neil Cosentino.
Okay, I've got it. I'll put it on screen for the pre-show audience.
All I need now is a channel.
Oh, that could be your avatar, right?
Yeah.
You can do that already on your YouTube or Google profile where it's got your picture. Just change it to this. Just drop the... Whoever made it, get them to drop the lettering because that won't look good. You know, if you can get it more sort of round-bottomed and just drop the writing, it'd make a great avatar.
Yes. I will ask him. But Brian was talking about the nice thing that he did for him. So I said, Adam, have you received any monetary funds for this work that you've been doing for everybody? For 2%, I can make sure we collect it.
You working at the VIG, guy?
The way I understand it, Adam helps pretty much everybody, doesn't he?
Adam is the nicest, sweetest, kindest, most gentle person you will ever encounter in your entire existence. He's Mr. Nice.
until somebody tries to rob him.
Or arrest him.
Yeah, that too. That's right. He's got two rough things on him, huh?
I like all really, really sweet, nice people. He's absolutely a dark horse.
No doubt.
Doesn't change what he is. Same goes for Anthony Riley, actually. Both of them are very similar in that respect. They'll go to the ends of the earth to help you out. You know, they really are very kind-hearted people.
Don't cross him.
Speaking of Anthony, wait, you're recording, aren't you? Never mind.
No, I'm not recording. That's not what I do.
What do you got to say anyway?
What was it you had to say about Anthony?
He is a very clever individual, and for reasons that I just can't discuss.
Oh, okay. I think I've just cottoned on to what you were about to talk about. Yeah, fine. No, I'd rather you didn't. But let's not let that obviously completely ruin the conversation in general. Right, Stag?
But the me and him after your show talked for quite a while about, you know, people like conspiracy cats, their culpability in teaching children that gravity is a force when they've been taught and it's been made aware to them several times that gravity is not a force. Is, you know, I think that's where the culpability comes when, you know, what we were talking about yesterday.
Yeah, I denied about cutting it out. So I listened back to it, and it was a little bit too vague and a little bit too long to trim it out. So had I listened back in that conversation would have been as it seemed, which is about 5 minutes. Well, it wasn't. It was about 25 minutes. And we're kind of all edging towards a point with a bit of rumpusing going on from the Discord server. No mention of any names there. But amongst the
Tommy.
Amongst the Discord rumblings, there's a periphery point that got focused on, and I don't want to demean it because it was your point, John, because you're talking about the etiquette of the approach, which is fine and a very worthy point, generally speaking. But in amidst the discussion of education over indoctrination and party political viewpoints, it kind of slips, or should slip into the background after a couple of comments on it in terms of the etiquette, right? But it didn't. It ended up being about 10-minute focus of the conversation. It did get back on track, but like I say, it just, after listening back to the conversation, there's loads of things that happen like that on the show where they're great to just keep in the show. In other words, you know, watch 1514, FED 1514 and cut, and you'll hear that conversation at the end. And it's definitely a worthy conversation to have a listen to, but it's just not trim out worthy, if you know what I mean. But it was a good conversation, and I'm smiling because Anthony and I are both on the exact same track with this and had reached that conclusion a long time ago. But it was nice listening to you guys going through the steps of, hold on, who's actually responsible here? So it's the teacher. So the teacher's responsible, but not if they don't overtly know. But Katz overtly knows. So Katz is overtly lying. And that was kind of the progression of the discussion, right? Anyway, I hope that's led enough for me to hope that this turns into a trim-out-worthy conversation. We'll see.
Right,
But shouldn't the teacher change, though? If they come to that realization, shouldn't the teaching change? Or do they have to stick with curriculum?
Unless they've got a good reason not to. And the good reason not to is that they're expressly told not to. So it falls on their shoulders. But obviously they want to teach the curriculum because they want to get a paycheck. And in most instances, in fact 99 times out of 100, you'd probably find that that's a perfectly reasonable excuse if it ever came to a head. However, at the point that you're overtly, consciously aware of this contradiction in your education versus your teachings, then the moral obligation, the standards go up one notch. And we have an example of that in Conspiracy Cats, which is, you know, Anthony's, what do you call them? When you put the, it's not scapegoat, it's not martyr, it's the same sort of thing but justified. I can't remember what the term would be.
Culpability?
Example. It's Anthony's example.
Well, my cousin's a school teacher. She refuses to look at anything to do with flat Earth. Thinks it's preposterous.
Well, that's one thing, being willfully ignorant. But, if you enter into a debate and you accept the authority that they do, they also have to accept their authority. In that, so in the debate, if it's cited and generally accepted, you can't then change what is, your authorities telling you. That means that he knows better, and he's doing it anyway.
Can you fill Sleeping Warrior in on what we're talking about, please?
Come on, John.
Kind of going back to the conspiracy cats thing about, like flagrantly lying to his kids.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, John. What's the correct position, ethically, morally, legally, from John's Bible, right? Your innate bodily radar. What's the correct position? Should we teach kids the current position that we believe it to be? Or should we teach them what we thought it was 110 years ago?
Well, no, that's the teacher will have to teach it as they understand it.
No.
That's their
No. Because
the teachers.
Well,
teacher has to take
let's stop. Right, each time we're all on the same side. We've all got a point of view. Let's not have this turn into what it did yesterday. I know you want to say, no, I don't agree. But just let him get to the end of the point, then disagree. Because otherwise it will be 4 minutes of you trying to talk through him and saying no.
All right, go on then.
Well, the teacher has to teach it as they understand it, because within the curriculum, everything is put through the lens of their understanding. That's why they're a teacher.
So why can't they teach both?
Hold
Why
on,
can't
Neil.
they teach flat Earth as an alternative?
You're not helping. Just let Sleeping Warrior respond. Just let's try and keep it.
Sorry.
Well, I want to try and keep it concise.
So we used to think that germs were caused by evil spirits. We used to think that germs didn't actually exist and cleaning our hands wasn't important. And we used to think that it was evil spirits that passed germs around. Until one day somebody washed their hands and realized that people weren't getting ill after they were washing their hands. And science then realized that washing your hands did reduce the contamination risk with respect to illness. So given that knowledge has progressed, the equivalent position would be that the LIGO gravitational wave observatory was at taxpayers' expense, $1.1 billion US, created to discover and detect and validate or refute Einsteinian gravitation. Given that they've now claimed to have done that and taxpayers paid for it, do you think that children should reap the rewards of that expenditure, given that it's the current position in science? Or do you think that it's better that they still think the evil spirits were the reason why germs were causing illness and teach them Newtonian?
Well, the same argument can be had for Einsteinian, because there was what was that equation? But Einsteinian's been experimentally invalidated.
Correct. Quantum mechanics has surpassed it. But I'm glad you've said that, because I didn't have to jump in before. So your question to Anthony was, or your statement to Anthony was, they have to teach it as they understand it. And Anthony jumped over at you and said, no, they don't have to teach it as they understand it. That's where it went. But then you asked him about, in terms of, I think we're all on the same page in terms of, if there's something taught to you, and then you go on to a higher education and then get taught that is literally incorrect, not the current rhetoric, you've got a completely new geometry, it doesn't work in the same way, etc., etc. It is unreasonable to then go back after the fact and teach that previous understanding that was replaced when you got to higher education to children. Now, in terms of quantum mechanics, that's why I thought you were asking the question, John. If the particular teacher hasn't been taught quantum mechanics, and the curriculum and current paradigm within heliocentrism is Einsteinian, then, as much as I hate to say it, it would only seem reasonable, and that's why I assume John made that point, to teach what they understand to be correct. In this circumstance, that is not what's happening. Quite the opposite, in
And-
fact. They're teaching something they know to be incorrect. Go ahead, Anthony.
So you're right to bring up the quantum mechanics point because it does invalidate Einstein. But we have a legal precedent set in the lead case in England that says that the Al Gore video, An Inconvenient Truth, was permitted to be presented to the children purely on the basis that it was representative of the current scientific position at the time. Whether you agree with that position or not, it was considered to be based on the current scientific position at the time. So therefore, it wasn't indoctrination because it was based in science, essentially. I know it isn't, but that's what the judge decided. So what that then does is puts a conflict, but then with a solution between quantum mechanics, which is considered to be the current position, with Einsteinian, which is considered to be the current position, against quantum mechanics that is not considered to be, to some people. But the court says, or the lead case says, that if it's based on current scientific position, like facts, consensus, if it's based on the current science, Al Gore was in. That would mean that Einstein is in, Newton is out, and then quantum mechanics would have to be presented as a balanced opposing view, because it may not have the scientific consensus behind it, but it does claim that it refutes Einstein, and it may or may not do. But the point is that Newton would be out, Einstein would be in because that's the current consensus view. And then quantum mechanics would have to get a footnote and it would say, well, we used to think that it was Einstein. We're now thinking it's quantum mechanical. But then we've got LIGO that says it is Einstein. But the key point to it is you open the door to the mind of the child to then inquire about, well, why don't we understand this? So they'll start asking the questions. And that's the point in science, to be thinking about things, right? So whether or not we agree or disagree on quantum mechanics or Einstein is irrelevant if the kids are taught the current position in science and it happens to be Einstein. Because even though Einstein's not right, they've got to then be taught quantum mechanics because it causes the problem with Newton's apple. How do they explain Newton's apple with Einstein? And the answer is,
Don't get into that. I appreciate your discussion of the two different points that should be pointed out at this stage. 106 year out of date, Newton out, all of those things relevant to the point. Beyond that, in terms of what it means in a normal discussion on this show, yeah, that would be totally perfect. I'd be thanking you. But in this context, there's only really one issue, and that's Newton and it being 106 years out of date, and moreover the position the teachers are put in. So let's put it in sympathy to the teachers rather than in their detriment. They've been put into a very awkward position where they are taught something up until their higher education status is achieved, at which point they know what they're about to teach is false. Now, whether they consciously understand that or appreciate it or contemplate it is a different story. However, there are certain examples, conspiracy cats being our example that we're holding up in this instance, where they are overtly aware that what they are teaching is in contravention of the current consensus science, in quotes, and the current actual science in terms of quantum mechanics. Anthony's position being that that should be how it should be presented. The current consensus science is Einstein. Technically speaking, you wouldn't present it in this way, but the opposing view, or is it correct to put it in that vernacular? Opposing view?
Yeah.
And opposing view
yeah.
is quantum mechanics. And that's how it should, according to the curriculum and according to the legislation, be taught. And that is laid down in the legislation. And if the teacher sees that that's not the case, in other words, they are actually presenting partisan political viewpoints as teaching points, then it is up to them, the teacher or the headmaster, to oppose that. Now, that is not reasonable to me. I'm not a teacher, but I don't see that as reasonable. For the teacher, I don't see that it's fair. Why should they be put in that position by way of the education structure teaching them as kids one thing that they then go on to learn is incorrect, to then have to go do-si-doing back in that circle chain to teach the kids before them the wrong information, and then it being on their shoulders to have to point it out when it's wrong, if they do, like Katz does, recognise it as an incorrect piece of partisan political doctrine that's not educational, it is indoctrination.
Well, there's actually a stopgap measure that's been built into the system, and here we call it the school board, and it's their job to, establish the curriculum. So I think if you wanted to point a finger, it might have to be in their direction, because there's a possibility that teachers have brought this up. You know,
Well, the law is clear with who has to do what. And under section 406, and I'll read to you verbatim what it says, so that because it literally tells you. I'm just getting to it. Just bear with me while I kill a little bit of time getting there. Just bear with me. 406. It tells us exactly who's got to do what. And what it says is under 406, it says the local authority, the governing body, and the headmaster shall forbid the promotion of partisan political views in the teaching of any subject in the school. So it tells you who's supposed to stop it. But if they're not stopping it, is there a crime of teaching it? That's the $1 million question. If they don't stop it and the teaching is allowed anyway, and they should have stopped it, are the teachers actually breaking any rules? Perhaps not. So the onus is on really the governing body, which would be, well, it's the local authority, the governing body, and the headmaster. It would be on basically the state to stop them from doing it. So the teachers, I would argue, they're not breaking any rules because there's no crime stopping them from teaching lies. The only crime is based against the local authority, the governing body, and the head teacher, but not the teachers.
it's a lot to think about, because it is a very complicated position to try to say that teacher understands this subject so well as to see the contradiction, see how it's a problem. I don't know, because I never really thought about it. And
No,
I'm
none of us do.
fairly educated.
But imagine that you're like the judge in the question, and you're residing in the matter between Nathan Oakley and the state against teaching children this stuff, right? And somebody tells you that Newton is no longer the current science. Regardless of whether you agree with that or not, if the current science is Einstein, that literally means that that's what the law says, that it should be based on current science. Well, that means that you've got to say, well, Einstein's the current position in science, so Einstein's got to be taught.
I
Which
agree.
doesn't matter to us, but it does matter to people that believe that Newton's apple falls from the tree because of a pull. That matters to them. But we go and go, well, the law, because otherwise the problem is the funding for Einstein-related space exploration for gravitational waves and all that is taxpayers' money. So I say we, I know it's Americans, but the taxpayer has paid $1.1 billion to fund LIGO to detect or refute gravitational waves, which they now claim to have done. Yet we can't teach that. Why can't we teach that to kids if it's the current position and it now validates Einstein? Not that he's right or wrong, but what's the point in giving science all the funding if it then doesn't filter through the system to teach to the kids? Because it means nobody's accountable for any shite that they preach in science because it doesn't go anywhere, right?
Well, that's a fair argument, but by the same token, stick to your strong point. What's your winning point? While the current science is not only out of date by 106 years, it is understood by the people teaching it to the children to be out of date and incorrect. They've been taught it, then they're being told to teach the contrary, which isn't the current science. That's the kind of beginning, middle, and end of this point.
Yeah, it's pretty much just about awareness, isn't it? Once they're made aware that it is not the current position and it is in contravention of the current position, they should just change it. Why would there be so much resistance?
Red tape, nothing else. It's just red tape.
But that's what the beauty of that's the beauty of the argument, isn't it? Because it's already got that lead case that says it's got to be fundamentally based on scientific position, right? It doesn't. It's a black and white exercise. It's like, well, what is the current science? Well, the current science is Einstein. Well, that's what should get taught to kids then.
Right.
And then there's going to be people that say, but Newton's my God. Newton's my hero. We don't want that. Well, tough.
Not relevant. The relevancy is down to what's the current science. And in this instance, right, we have to grit our teeth and say, yeah, they should be teaching Einstein and the contradictory point, which is quantum mechanics. Because the current, gritty teeth again, the consensus says it's Einstein. You know what I mean? You've got to grit your teeth and just accept that we're actually fighting for them to teach Einstein in this instance because it is the current consensus science, in quotes. Now, we're not even going to, I assume, get into the wrangle-dangle of how non-scientific it is, because we have to accept that if we're going to go by their standards in their system and their rules, their legislation lays down that it should be current science is Einstein, open and shut in that regard. None of the legitimacy needs to be questioned in terms of the scientific validity of Einstein. None of the contrary points in terms of quantum mechanics need to be put across and argued, because it is actually a contradictory point that should be taught, because that's what the legislation states. So in terms of the actual facts of the matter, they are undisputable. So it is just red tape. That's it.
Correct, I agree. And at the end of the day, if your deciding vote is that, well, I don't agree with Einstein, I'm sorry, that it's too complicated for kids to learn because it's based heavily on tensor equations, well, that's not what the law says. The law clearly says that it's about whether or not it's the current position in science as by scientific evidence or scientific consensus or facts or whatever you want to. If it's the current science, it's in. Well,
correct.
That means that Newton's out.
And I've seen plenty of reification fallacies dressed up as educational tools when it comes to Einsteinian bending pseudo-force space. They stretch out a sheet and throw a bowling ball in the middle and then roll a tennis ball around the outside edge of it and tell you that's bendy space-time. And I've seen that demonstrated time and time again to children. Now, do I agree with it? No. Is it the current consensus science? Yes, it is, and it can be demonstrated and dumbed down. It doesn't matter what you do in terms of how you teach it. That's irrelevant. What's relevant is the incorrect, out-of-date position currently being taught, and the fact that the teachers who are apparently responsible for this know that.
Nathan, have you checked your emails?
No.
I'm just reading the email. Point 28.
Whoa. Stop. We're not doing that at this conversation.
Okay. Well, that's for me is the bit we need to progress on.
Well, yeah, I have a question, though. Does anybody know if this has been a contentious issue before that has been, like, brought up?
Oh, hell yeah. Welcome to Flat Earth Debate Live. I'm your host, Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel, or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon, and join button if you'd like to become a Nathan Oakley 1980 channel member and keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you would like to support the channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live, and there's also a PayPal, Patreon, and crypto link in the info box below the video. Also below this video, you can get £50 for swapping your UK electricity supplier to Octopus Energy, and this is a particular note if you drive an electric vehicle. Most importantly, if you'd like to join the discussion, simply mute the page you are currently watching, then click the link in the info box below this video to join the panel and express your views on the nature of Earth. If you do join, please don't swear. If you do, you'll be ejected, and if you are, please don't try to rejoin the stream using sock accounts. You'll be warmly welcome back on the next stream. Please also share the show on social media. Sharing the show obviously increases the live audience, but this in turn increases the chances of a more diverse panel, so please share the show on Facebook and Twitter. One last time, if you're new to the channel or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon and join button to keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. Now we are joined by Sleeping Warrior, 10th Man, Brian's Logic, Scots. We got the Adam Meakin, Neil, Refracted Curvature. Did I miss anybody? A whole bunch of people in Discord, and I think that's it. Welcome one and all.
Good morning.
Afternoon,
Yeah,
guys.
morning.
Hey, good morning. Morning.
Morning.
Not morning.
Depending on how close to the line we can get, Anthony, are you happy to carry on with the conversation that we were having in the pre-show, or do you want me to just kick in straight into housekeeping and it'll never be discussed again?
Yes, provided that numbered points are not talked about, fine, yeah.
Yeah, I think the only two people to be concerned with that are Adam and John, but hopefully they can bite their tongues in that regard without starting a live show with inside information, in jokes, or any of that thing, which is very unprofessional, but we need to clear it up. We are on a live show and we don't want anything letting out that shouldn't be let out. Let's just say it like that. Okay,
correct.
So where were we?
Storm, I understand. I shall just...
Cool. Okay, well, I'll give a quick summary. So in the pre-show, we were discussing the whys and wherefores of the education structure in terms of Newton. So the base argument is that the education structure here in the UK, at least, whether or not this is translatable to the US is under discussion, or has been in the pre-show. You have legislation that lays down exactly how you should teach children. And the current science is what should be taught, and if there are opposing views, they should be presented. What should not be presented is partisan political views, out of date, contextually in this instance, Newton's out-of-date science. 106-year out-of-date science is what is taught to children. Now, the discussion that we're having revolves around the idea that teachers specifically go through their education right up to A level in the UK, being taught that gravity is a force and that Newtonian gravity is gravity. Then they get to higher education and get taught something completely contradictory. They're told that that is not the case, that gravity is not a force, and then they get taught about Einstein. They're then put into the education system to reteach something that they've been told is incorrect. That would be Newton. So as it stands, there is a piece of taught information that is out of date and stands in direct violation of the legislation here in the UK. And we are discussing who's responsible. The responsibility falls on the shoulders of the head teacher and the teacher who is actually teaching the information. So it's their responsibility, which I think is totally unreasonable, though I shouldn't really offer my opinions in this particular summary. I think I've covered everything so far. That's it for you in the live audience. Now you're up to date with what we were discussing in the pre-show. Hence, we're dispensing with housekeeping because it's a very good discussion. Who wants to lead off from that opener?
Well, I'll start with a slight correction. Let me start with a slight correction. The people responsible are the local authority, the governing body, and the headmaster, but not the teacher. Got that slightly wrong, but
not the teacher. I was
not
wrong.
The teacher.
I'll have to correct. Well, although those shows haven't been published yet, on the last two shows I've been saying it is the teacher's responsibility. Am I incorrect in that then?
It's at the head ultimately, doesn't it?
The law states that the local authority, the governing body, which would be the National Curriculum Policy guys in the Cabinet Office, and the headmaster shall forbid the promotion of partisan political views in the teaching of any subject in the school. But it doesn't stop the teacher from teaching it. They've got to be stopped from teaching it. But if they're not stopped, then there's no crime against the teacher for teaching it, no matter how wrong it may be, because it's not, the teachers are not covered, it seems.
Well,
it's down to the state, not...
Oh, hold on then. Well, morally, does that not change the position that Conspiracy Cats finds himself in, by example, when you describe this? Because in that case, he has no moral obligation, does he, in that regard?
He has no legal obligation.
No legal obligation?
He can teach them any old shite he wants, according to this. This is the current position in the law, because he's not got an obligation not to teach partisan political views. It's the headmaster that has to stop it.
Okay, I stand corrected.
That's more a minor point to kind of, it's a bit like me as a superintendent. Yeah, ultimately, I'm kind of responsible for the things other pharmacists do under my direction. It's kind of means I have to keep an eye on things, doesn't it? Because I ultimately can be charged. Say somebody makes a dispensing error and I've not really made sure the environment is correct, i.e., and we can apply that to the teachers. So we're letting them go off and teach global warming or CRT, whatever. There's a level that sits with the headmaster so that he is culpable for that teaching if it's shown to be wrong, and I'm culpable if errors occur because of not the correct setup within the institution. And I think that's why the headmaster has to sit over it. I'm not sure they have no legal responsibility directly. I think that would sit in terms of what's being taught.
I was going to say that teachers
Tommy,
exactly,
please, Tommy. Adam's in the middle of talking. Right, I'm just going to ask you once this show. If you do it again, I'm just going to have to shut you up. Right, the amount of complaints I'm getting and emails I'm getting about you interrupting people. You're on our side. He's in the middle of talking.
I was just going to refer that to Tony just back, because there has to be some culpability in terms of erroneous teaching. So I don't think we could have the statement, but I do agree that I think legally, you see, that the individual teacher would be subject to disciplinary stuff within the school then. So the headmaster sits there to control them. He has to control them. So if he allows or she allows them to carry on doing erroneous teaching, then a legal responsibility under the Education Act sits with them. That says, I understand it. I don't think it means they're free to teach whatever they want.
Well, I think when you realise that the national curriculum document for which the syllabus is based on says right at the front, it says this document is you are required by law to teach the contents of this thing, and it goes further and says that you should not deviate from this without good reason. That kind of limits them to what they have to teach, because even if they disagree with what's in there because they believe that Einstein's right, is it a good enough reason to go against what the national curriculum tells you that you've got to teach, even though you know it's a lie? Is that a, quote, good enough reason to depart from it? Because it's not the current position in science, and if it was or it wasn't,
you can't expect teachers
would you
to walk
expect
out
the
from their job
teacher
because
to...
they failed to enforce what they've been put as like mandatory.
Last chance, Tommy.
It's forcing them
Last
to
chance,
just follow through.
Tommy. Did what I just said to you not compute?
I'm just elaborating on what you said.
What, while he's in the middle of saying it?
No, he literally was come to the end of his conclusion, I'm sure.
Just take a breath, Tommy. Just listen. So the second part was that would you expect a teacher to put the head above the parapet and, quote, risk the risk of prosecution for teaching something that was not in the national curriculum because somebody disagreed with them that it was a good enough opinion, even though it was based on current science? So why would any teacher risk that? You wouldn't take the risk if you've got mouths to feed and mortgages to pay. You just teach them what's in the thing and just say, well, that's what's in the national, which is what they do. So is it okay to teach kids the wrong science, hiding behind the blanket of, well, that's just my job to teach the curriculum, when you know that it's wrong?
Exactly.
I think that's a harder thing to attack, because you're asking on that moral level to challenge each individual. I think the way we're using the Education Act to see the way it sits differently with regards to Dimmock, for me, is that with regards to Dimmock, we've got the two positions, that it's the world's gonna, sea levels are gonna rise. There's this data here, and there's the data on the other side that opposes that view, and nothing's set in stone. So the science is, as they would call it, not settled. So under the Dimmock, that's why it's important to kind of clarify that there are different positions. I think when we look at Newton and Einstein, there aren't different positions, and within the education system, they continue to teach Newton without saying, first and foremost, this is wrong. So we're not having a juxtaposition of one opinion and another opinion. There is no opinion that says Newton is right. Yeah, but it appears that the education system is presenting Newton as right. And some of the responses I've seen are, well, there's no challenge there. People wouldn't say I'm Newtonian or Einsteinian. No one in education would say they're Newtonian. And that's, I think, is the thing that the education system is misrepresenting, that in some way Newton has validity.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So because of our familiarity with this subject, we're talking in shorthand, which the audience might not appreciate. So throughout the discussion, we're going to be referencing Dimmock and Gore. And I want Tommy to actually interject so he does actually have his opportunity at this point to say what he wanted to say. But then I want one or other of you or both, I don't care who, to explain what we mean when we're talking about Gore specifically and what we're talking about when we're talking about Dimmock. Go ahead, Tommy. What did you want to add?
Oh,
Sorry
yeah,
to bite your head off, by the way.
Yeah, it'd be natural for you to blame the teachers, Nathan, because I'd assume that if they know better, then it'd be a conscious effort for them to just stand up against what they're teaching. But like he was saying, it's down to the headmaster, and I kind of feel it the same way. Like if you go to the doctors or you go to any sort of like a public service, there's always like a queue that you have to wait through or a form that you have to fill out, and things could be done much smoother and much easier. And I feel like if people use their intuition, so if teachers had more of a control of what they were teaching, I reckon you'd probably have more success in them areas, because I think different states have different laws and different ways of thinking. I think if you have like a blanket statement for kind of like a whole country, it's good for structure, but at the same time it can be very counterproductive to increase like the best sort of teaching. Like, because some teachers will probably, if they had the freedom to be able to teach what they thought was right, they'll say, "Look, I've been studying what I've been given, and I've learned that it goes against it. So we're not, rather than say with the high, I could learn Newton's laws, we'll just go straight to Einstein because this is the current science." And that's what if teachers had that freedom.
And most people sorry to cut you off, Tommy. They don't get that freedom. They've got a curriculum that they have to stick to. And the issue specifically at hand is the fact that the curriculum contradicts the original teachings of the teacher. And that's specifically. So they can't just say, "Oh, well, I know that, there is a Christian God, so therefore I'm not going to teach this particular part of the religious education curriculum." They'd get fired. So it's not like we're discussing whether or not they've got a choice or an option in this. It's more what's in the curriculum laid down by legislation and what are those teachings. And those teachings are in the curriculum as Newtonian, regardless of the fact that the teachers who are teaching it know damn well it's not true. So can one of you, either Adam or Sleeping Warrior, explain what Gore is?
Just very quickly state.
Go on, Brian.
Tommy's point was that he understands why people would blame the teachers, but it's not their fault because they would teach different things, maybe some of them if they could.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree. It's just a different, it's just not, this is a hyper-specific topic, Brian. I'm not knocking Tommy, and I don't think his point's invalid. It's just, it's so specific. We're not trying to broaden it out into the moralistic question of whether or not teachers should agree with what they're teaching. That's too broad, even though that is so specific also. But that even then is still too broad. This is such a specific conversation. I'm really sorry, and I don't mean to cut you off or bite your head off, Tommy, but we're going to get through this. I promise.
No worries. I'm just elaborating on what you're saying, because I thought it'd be natural to blame the teachers as well, but yeah. I do think
I appreciate that. Just let me get back on track. So I appreciate your elaboration, but it's hyper specific. So elaboration isn't what's required. So it's not your fault you don't appreciate that. Normally it would be welcomed. It's just because the subject is so hyper specific. And I hate discussing this in a way because we have to kind of grit your teeth and accept certain things in the legislation that you cannot deal with. In other words, like whether or not teachers can decide. It's a worthy point, Tommy, but I just want to get to Gore first. Whoever's going to do it, Adam Moore, and then we'll get to Dimmock after.
Well, let me do it. Let me do it.
Tony's best for this.
So, Gore and Dimmock, right? Stuart Dimmock was the guy that brought the legal challenge, and he was questioning whether or not Al Gore's video on climate change was indoctrination or not, because it was very, very right wing. It was very militant in its approach. It was very much, if you don't do this, we will die kind of thing. End of the world is nigh. Very conspiratorial, perhaps, you might argue, some might say. But the decision that the judge made was that because it was based fundamentally on science, whether you agree with that or disagree with that is irrelevant. It was based on the current science at that time. Then it was not considered to be indoctrination because it was based in science, right? So that was the precedent that the judge set. So then the question is really, well, regardless of what you think of Einstein, and obviously none of us think that Einstein's correct, but if that's the current position in science today for gravitation, then that's what should be taught. Then regardless of your opinion of it, it's black and white. It should be Einstein and it should not be Newton. Einstein should be giving his presentation of opposing views as well, because quantum mechanics says that he's wrong. But what that then does is it opens up the doorway to the mind of the child that would then say, well, why are we being taught Newton if Einstein's correct. And that's the beauty of the conversation that they currently don't have. And that's really what makes it illegal, because you are not giving them that opportunity to agree or disagree with Einstein by considering other opposing views to Einstein. You just taught a one-sided, indoctrinated, brainwashing. This is why Newton is true, because we can calculate it with F equals ma, therefore it's force, and that's why things move. And it's completely wrong. Now, the reason why this is important and why it's political is on the 27th of September, Boris Johnson was on national television and he was outlining the government's, quote, ambitions for the space program that they want to engage in, because we're not part of Europe anymore. So Boris, in his wisdom, wants to put England or United Kingdom on the map with this national space strategy. Bearing in mind that LIGO cost $1.1 billion of taxpayers' money, and they've come out with claims that they've detected gravitational waves, which proves that Einstein is correct and Newton is wrong. Don't you think that that leading edge technology, that leading edge science should filter through the system to the kids so that they're at least aware that LIGO exists and it supports Einstein and it directly refutes Newton? But that's the science that they should be teaching to the kids, but that's not getting through. Why? Who knows? But the point is, if England are looking at making a national space strategy, how many billions of taxpayers' money pounds will be poured into this cosmic black hole research based on the principles of Einsteinian gravitation and space wormholes and all that nonsense? And you've only got to type it in Google and you can see it, that they've got an agreement with NASA now. They're going to be studying the chronosphere of the sun or whatever it is that they're studying. That's millions and millions and millions of pounds of taxpayers' money that they're going to try and authorize by pushing this kind of this Einsteinian stuff, because that is the current position in science. And that's why it's political, because it's trying to open the door to taxpayers' money being poured down the black hole of space exploration when it's all based on a concept. That is the bell that needs to be ringing in people's heads. They're trying to take money off us, and they're trying to use it. They're trying to take money off us in the name of space. And it really works against us to even argue for Einstein, because it supports the narrative of space exploration. But we also have to give the balanced opposing view to Einstein too, which says that it's all based on Narnia. That's the bit that needs to be in there too. That's why we need to be told about this stuff.
Okay, let's throw it open go ahead, John, and then I'll throw it open to anybody who wants to comment from Discord. I'll see if they're all off mute while you're giving your comment. Go ahead.
I was about to say that Bill's inequality is what I was thinking of earlier. You know, that needs to be taught right alongside of the Einstein nonsense.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, fundamentally, would you go back to teaching about evil spirits passing around germs when you know that it's to do with washing your hands? You wouldn't do that. So why would we teach Newton? You wouldn't do that. But that is the position.
Okay, go ahead, Riven.
The thing is, because both of them are proven themselves to be contradictory, and they still teach it. It's like, it's not even like this is up for contention. It's like it's self-evident that it's a contradiction. You know, it's not. It's all agreed upon within itself. It's self-contained within itself, and it's still then taught,
Correct.
even though it's known within itself to be, you know, contradictory, and they're still teaching them both to be true. It's crazy that they can do that.
Correct. That's why the Dimmock case is relevant so much, because in terms of what's been set down as precedent. What is the precedent? Well, what's the current science was that judge's ruling. This is current science, so regardless of whether it's right or wrong, it's the current understanding through legislation that's acceptable, so therefore not indoctrination. Okay, well, if it's current science that's the standard, then it's very easy to disprove what's being taught in schools up into A level in the UK as science. It isn't. It's been debunked. Correct. It's been superseded. And even the thing that superseded has even been superseded. Einstein's been superseded. So both of those two current science viewpoints, I say with gritted teeth, need to be presented to the children in whatever dumbed down crappy form that they present it in the syllabus.
Well, I don't think I would call Einsteinian being superseded. It's been experimentally invalidated.
Correct.
That's a little bit different.
It is, but in terms of, we have to go back to gritting our teeth and accepting what they think is science to work within their system. Consensus science is what they deal with at a worldwide level. So if that's what we're working within, and we're trying to change something within the system, there are certain limitations that you just have to grit your teeth and accept. Likewise, in the pre-show, I said, look, we're having to fight for Einsteinian gravity here. And it reminds me of QE, right at the beginning of this discussion, telling us, well, you've got to get them to actually understand their current science before you can pummel their current science, referring to Einstein. Because you spend all day pointing out to globe-believing idiots that what they're arguing for in terms of mass attracting mass and Newtonian gravitation, in name only, it's not Newton's, is out of date by 106 years, superseded by Einstein. Now, we've not even got to the stage where we can get our opponents to accept their current quote-unquote science so we can pummel it into the middle of next oblivion.
Well, if it was science, it wouldn't be able to be superseded. So
Correct.
That instantly ends it, doesn't it?
Yeah. If it was
So is
experimentally
science not
validated,
political?
ascertained cause and effect through hypothesis-based experimentation, that would be it. Empirically validated through experiment doesn't get changed with the times. But Einstein has because it isn't experimentally validated. That's the bottom line.
What definition of
the
science
only
was this
reason-
judge going off?
Consensus. So, I have to remind, I got this rude awakening when we were on Steve McRae's show. You were there, Anthony. Within the opener, in terms of what we laid down between us as a debating party, what were we going to accept as the standards? And it was laid down like I now understand it and didn't believe or know at the time and or realise it and was shocked when I found out. Consensus science is the current accepted standard. That's why, like I say, I've got to grit my teeth and say, okay, if the current science is what should be taught, we know for damn sure that it ain't Newton. They're wrong. The laws of Newton were not right. The scientists know it, so do the teachers. So in that respect, I have to grit my teeth and say, okay, what you call science, and I won't even pepper it with the preface of that. It's just accepted that we're going to work within the frames and confines of the system we're finding ourselves battling. Because you can't not. You won't progress if you just try and work your way around those things. Anthony's expressed all of this in terms of how Dimmock failed, right? Well, in failing, they set precedent. Now we've got precedent. Current science is the precedent. If current science is Einstein, okay, well, that's what you should be teaching. Definitely not Newton.
Correct.
Yeah, just to, that is within the Dimmock case. And what did come out, and this is the difference, is that they did say, well, okay, if you're going to do these things, if there is not settled time, if it is political, if there is opposing views, then you don't have to give it equal airtime, but you have to give a balance to present it. Now, that's in an area where there's contention. We're not even in an area of contention. We're categorically stating this is no longer science, yet it is being presented as. So there's even more of a case to balance this viewpoint. Or in my case, it's not about balancing, it's about contextualizing it correctly. It's not being presented as out-of-date science and a rule of thumb way of working stuff out, if you still want to do that. It's being presented as correct science. And that's the point of challenge to me, that in the
Exactly.
It's irrefutable.
Exactly. It's cut and dry. The conclusion at the end of the pre-show was, well, what's stopping this being immediately put into place as legislation in the UK right now? Well, nothing, just red tape. That's it. Red tape. Because it's cut and dry. There's no two ways. There's no ifs, buts, or maybes about it. You know,
Correct.
You've got a million citations from the scientists themselves declaring how bunk it is. And the teachers themselves who are teaching it are taught how bunk it is. This is not a contentious issue in regards to the actual matter at hand. Hence, it's progressing. But that's how you've got to progress through these things. You're never going to have any success with something that's tentatively correct, as Dimmock found out. You know, you've got to be absolutely certain to have any sort of chance of getting any legislative change. That won't happen unless you're absolutely on a firm ground from the start. Well, in this respect, there is no contentious nature about whether or not it's valid scientifically or not when it comes to Newton. It isn't.
Can I just say that? Sorry, Adam.
Just one last bit. The only contention arrives is when you throw in quantum mechanics. There, within the annals of education, you would have people arguing and having this debate over which model of reality works best for them within Einstein or quantum. But there's absolutely nobody anywhere that would argue for Newton, and that's the crux of it for me.
I just wanted to say that this is genius. Like, hold on a second, Brian. I just want to say that this entire concept is genius. Like, it's locking our opponents in legally to what their current nonsense is.
Yeah, I have two. Sorry, I go after you, Nate.
No, I'm just agreeing with him, and I was about to introduce you to go next. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I have two things to say now. One is they don't want to bring Einstein out into the public domain. They want to keep it within universities, because we bring it out into the public domain, then it can be shown that Einstein was debunked by quantum mechanics. And number two, which is a far more, in some ways, it's very similar really, but it's a far more, to me, it's a more important point, is that we can show with physical demonstration, hypothesis test, that relative density equilibrium is the cause of the effect that they claim. So we have science experiment that adheres to scientific method that supports us.
But we don't need to go there. We don't need to make our own claim, do we? All we've got, we don't even have to debunk a claim. All we're showing is that what's being taught is accepted as incorrect. And it's as simple as that. That's what we're trying to get recognized.
Exactly.
What's being taught is incorrect, recognized by education themselves.
Exactly. It has to be that way to make any difference. And that's why I'm jumping on down Tommy's throat when he's tried to expand it out in terms of whether or not teachers should have the right to choose what they're teaching if they know it's incorrect. And, based on my former understanding, I thought that they had a certain responsibility that they actually don't. But that's not the issue. The issue is when you have a specific piece of information, that would be Newton, and it is demonstrably, factually incorrect, superseded, were not right, all those descriptions of it, then it should not be taught to children. That's it. Now, when you take those things forward, that's the only things that have ever got a chance of actually making any difference. And you've got to suck it up when you come to discussing things like Einstein. We all know that there's no experimental validity. We also know that we live in a consensus science-based reality, and that what the system we're attacking understands science to be. They're not going to be interested in us pointing out along the way that, well, by the way, also the current consensus science, that isn't really science either. Oh yeah, okay, I don't care. What was your point again? That gets lost. The point is, kids are getting taught incorrect information by people who know it's incorrect.
Exactly.
Well, I wasn't trying to add in. Go on, Tommy, go after you.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, yeah. It's when the actual catalyst, the actual source that's actually teaching the information is consciously aware that it's false information and still publishing it without a complaint. It just goes to show you how bizarre it is, and it's not even like that you disagree with what's being taught. It's itself doesn't agree with itself, and it's being taught. So it's not even like no one can pin it on you by saying you're a flat earther or because you're anti whatever, education. That's all to say.
Okay, we'll get Brian's opinion, then I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I wasn't bringing up relative density equilibrium to add it in to a challenge against the education boards. I was bringing it up so we don't forget.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm glad you do. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I've got to contrast it with the fact that when you're trying to fight a system, there's going to be certain routes and paths that are hard forged that you have to follow, and that's just the way it is. Trying to scale the walls and bring down the walls as you do so, it ain't going to work. You just got to focus on what you can get a win with in this respect. Well, what's the fact of the matter? No Newtonian gravity. It's well and truly established. It's even taught to the teachers who are teaching it. So there shouldn't be any ifs, buts or maybes about it. That's what's being attacked. But the different direction I'm going to take it in is in regard to quantum mechanics and the fact that that is at a scientific level and consensus scientific level, and potentially at a I keep wanting to say national level, but like a worldwide, and I'm even going to put it in quotes for context, global scale, paradigm changing. Now, the people involved in the scientific discoveries being made in that realm, that'd be quantum mechanics, understand this and express it. Very powerful, some of the statements that come out of the people who are looking into this particular science. And that is where it seems to me there is a fundamental change that maybe has to happen that would rock heliocentrism to its core. Now, that scientific discovery has been ushered in by these institutions. That's undeniable. We wouldn't know about it if it had been kept under wraps, if they'd suppressed it. But the discoveries are very much out there in the public, even though they're contradictory to the current paradigm. So the question then is raised, is what we're doing, and I know we've discussed it before, actually part of a controlled release that is necessary as a direct consequence of quantum mechanics? Anybody got any comment?
I do. It goes back to what we were discussing, culpability with conspiracy cats. Could you imagine him having to go back? Well, he wouldn't go back, but to come out one day and just be like, Newton's wrong because my syllabus says I have to say so.
Pride. That's just talking about pride. That's what it boils down to in that respect. Anybody else?
I can't ever imagine somebody like conspiracy cats ever coming out, and because it's kind of like the declaration that like when they say they come out the closet and admit that they're gay. It's kind of like coming out the closet and admitting that Newton's not a force. I can't imagine conspiracy cats ever doing that.
What I would say about it is, now I've said before on the show, I'm not going to say it now again, I've said it twice before, my own belief of why they teach gravity as a force to people until they get to university physics degree levels or whatever. But the ballers would always say, oh, it's because it's easier to teach kids that than Einstein, right? And this is the general, and that's not even them making it up, that's the general consensus. That's the excuse people have given to themselves. It's easier. No, what it is you're creating a belief within, starting with children, and then moving up into adulthood for all those people who, whether they go to university or not, you're creating the belief of gravity.
Correct.
So that's why it's easy to do this bait and switch in physics level, degree level physics in education, because it's like, well, gravity still exists. It's just it's this and not that. There's no question of whether, hang on, maybe this gravity doesn't exist. That doesn't happen because they're already indoctrinated into the belief that it does.
So you're kind of saying it's easier to tell the kids that Santa came down a chimney, even if you haven't got one, and left the presents on his way around the world, which is a sphere in this example, to drop all the other children off presents in one night than to explain the economics of manufacturing and retail. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, yes and no, because manufacturing and retail is real. So it's like people will just believe in Einstein because they've spent all their life being taught about Newton. So they don't mind switching the description. But that's fine by them because they already have a belief.
I'm going to get this parallel in. I'm going to do it. So by comparison then, if you were told because you're a little bit older, you're 6 or 7, and you're starting to figure it out, and then you want more elaboration on the story of Santa, and you're told about the elves on the production line at the North Pole. Is it still taught as the North Pole, this lie? Or is it Lapland or something now? Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that you start explaining that you've got magical elves that magic the toys into existence so they can go into the sack and then onto the back of the sleigh and then around the world and then drop down the chimneys, and that's easier as a fantasy story, even though it's not true, because then you've got a direct parallel. Well, it's not true that we've got Newtonian mechanics. It's not true that we've got a manufacturing process run by elves.
Well, yeah, I understand that. But as long as you keep believing in Santa, that's all that matters to them.
That's what I was fishing for. Thank you. That's what I was fishing for. Exactly. As long as you keep believing in gravity. because gravity is a fundamental get-around for most of the problems within the heliocentric model, which they still want to retain to some extent. So even though it might be dying out by way of quantum mechanics, you still need people who are in that paradigm to have a get-around for all the problems that are arisen within the life cycle of heliocentrism as a religion. And gravity is the answer to almost everything, isn't it? So if you suddenly don't educate them that gravity is a force holding you to the spinning ball and stopping you from flying off, then you won't accept that programming of a heliocentric world earlier on, and that could cause problems and people rebelling against this religious indoctrination that is only in place in the first instance to keep people under control. So if the purpose of it is control, then you need this educational structure to remain in place until the heliocentric model religion has dissolved. And I think we're in the process of it being dissolved.
I'd also like to point out
every time I spoke about the globe, it's like, why isn't the atmosphere spinning off in centrifugal force? Oh, gravity. Why is it we've got containment? Oh, gravity. Why is it seeming like it's not moving even though apparently it is? Oh, because of gravity. Like, gravity's doing so many things simultaneously. It's literally even creates their solar system. Or how did the new elements get created?
What is the
from hydrogen?
definition
Oh,
for gravity? How do they define gravity?
Before
going into a cause,
that's the problem.
Assigning a cause.
Well, that's a good the question you're asking is perfectly relevant because currently there are two gravities. Einsteinian and Newtonian. One is taught to children and is incorrect and not the current paradigm. The other is taught to the teachers that are teaching the children Newtonian. That's Einsteinian.
Well, doesn't that mean then that there's only one? If one's been replaced by the other, there's not two. There's only one.
Yeah, but it's semantics. Yes, strictly speaking, there's only one. Strictly speaking, there isn't any. There's no gravity. But in terms of the structure that we're working in and the paradigm we're working in, there's two. One that's 106 years out of date and still being taught to children by the teachers who've been taught the second, Einsteinian, which superseded it 106 years ago. So there's two.
It's already frustrating enough that you have to talk about this theoretical stuff already.
Oh, hold on, Tommy. Let Tommy round out his point, and then we'll go to Brian. Go ahead, Tommy.
I was just saying, it's frustrating enough that you had to talk about these theoretical paradigms in the first place, because even though Einstein supersedes it, it's still wrong anyway. But it's still just like it's still being taught as it's not even the most current. So it's hilarious that we're arguing within a theoretical paradigm anyway. It's already patronising enough to be stepping into this mathematical description of reality.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, we have to, as I've said many times, have to grit our teeth and start to accept some things that we argue against vehemently here on this show. So, for instance, the acceptance of what is and is not science has to be set on one side in order for us to make this journey into this discussion, because it's within the red tape of a long-established system that you're not just going to jump over the walls of, metaphorically speaking. So, yeah, it's frustrating, but it speaks volumes, Tommy. Not only to our opponents, but anybody we approach with this information. Because, as a matter of fact, we can accept the path that we have to walk along and accept that we have to carry certain burdens along that path. The burden of having to promote something we know is factually incorrect, and the only respite from that burden, if you will, is the fact that we know that there's an alternative view, i.e. quantum mechanics. But we're still having to say these two should be presented equally with gritted teeth. Well, that takes great fortitude for us as flat earthers to have to accept and do this, and should show that to an onlooker that even when we're working outside of the paradigm we agree with, to take progress seriously, we have to accept these things that we don't agree with and offer the alternative, because that's what the structure demands. And we can't work outside of those walls. That's what we have to accept. Now, our opponents just tell us, you're just wrong. You don't understand that it's a force. You can think of it as a force. They double speak. Well, we're not double speaking. We're just saying this is how your current science is presented. Your current science isn't being taught. Your out-of-date, 106-year, superseded science is. That's it.
Well, that's in context of this debate, that would be one of the benefits of this moving forward, is that, Einsteinian and Newtonian are so contradictory, and our opponents jump between the two so continuously, it's hard to pin them down on anything when they make claims about it.
Well,
That's because
well,
they've not
they're
been
all
taught
something that they
Einsteinian.
don't really understand anyway. This is something they just get a grade for through school, and they feel that they've got some superior advantage over you because they have like a grade. It's like an achievement for most of these people. It's their greatest achievement, which is to get a degree in the expert that field that you're telling them that is actually false, and they're never going to deny that because it's taken away their ego, and that's why they feel attacked personally because these people are sitting there looking at telemetry data and fucking satellite data and thinking that they're actually looking at satellites going around the world because they're looking at numbers changed on the screen.
I personally can't count how many ballers I've spoken to that just will not accept that Newton has been superseded or shown to be wrong. Just will not accept it. They just say no.
Yeah.
Tommy just said-
Yeah, that's because
Tommy
they've
just
been.
said then.
That's the nub of it, isn't it? That's the point. Because they've been taught it as children, right up into A level.
Exactly, that's the problem. If they were taught Einstein instead of Newton, there wouldn't even be this resistance against Newton because they were taught it was Einstein and Newton. Yeah, he was believed to be right up to World War One-ish, there or thereabouts. But all right, we were at war with Germany, and a German national presented the new science. But we're 100 years on now. We've got LIGO that costs 1.1 billion taxpayers' dollars, yet they're still being taught Newton. Well, what is the point of LIGO then if they're not going to teach the results of it to the children because the results are supposed to be the science?
Right.
It's
like saying,
outrage.
we'll teach them phlogiston, it's easier.
Yeah, exactly.
There is a comparison, Nathan, with chemistry. When you start GCSE chemistry, you're taught some of the history of different atomic models, particularly like the current Bunn model, which is like an atom's got like electrons stuck on the outside like a current Bunn. Instead of orbits and all this sort of thing, they're just stuck on. And you taught these things as part of the history of it, but you taught clearly that's false, and we won't be using that model anymore. Now, in Newton, that's not the case, even though the analogy is exactly the same. Newton's the current Bunn model of physics. It's been superseded, just like current atomic theory in terms of the structure of electrons has been superseded the current Bunn model. We don't deal with current Bunns anymore, but they are all the time. They're giving the kids current Bunns when we've got a superseded model, which is the accepted. And just to address some, that's the point. We don't need to bring any of our thoughts into it. And as Nathan says, it might be a bit galling defending Einstein here, but that's the strength of the argument. It's their statements of truth that we're holding up to them and making them kind of have to stand by. That's what we're asking them to do.
And it's the same.
Where I got to go back.
I would just say it's the same steps in debate. I've said this, I'll give quantum eraser the credit he deserves, because these are the same steps you have to take in debate. Before you can pummel Einstein, you've got to have an acceptance of Einstein. And as it's just been pointed out by Rams, they don't have the current acceptance of Einstein because they're being taught 106 years, kids and adults alike, 106 year out-of-date Newtonian nonsense. Well, therefore, how... maybe that's the reason. How the hell are we supposed to defend the current pseudo-4-space time-bending nonsense in terms of its completely being obliterated scientifically with the onset of quantum mechanics when people don't even accept the current scientific nonsense they're being presented with by the consensus? What chance have we got? Maybe that's the point.
Well, the main sort of point I brought up yesterday with Anthony and John and the lads after the show, I would consider one of the main problems here is that people actually believe that there's a definition for gravity. Like, they actually believe there's more than one definition because you ask someone to define gravity and they can give you three different people can give you three different definitions. If they're ballers, especially. Officially, there's two, right? And
no,
officially
there's one.
I'm not finished. Before you jump on me, please. I knew you were going to jump in. I'm sorry now, I have to stop you. Right? Officially, right, there's two, and only one of them is supposed to be correct. No, none of them are a definition. They're descriptions. They're not defined. You can't claim a definition of something that you can't show. If you don't have it to show, you can't define it. Because anyone can give a different definition.
What's the phenomenon?
But hang on 1 second. My point being is that let's say, Rams, you give a definition of something, and I can give a different definition of it, and you can't prove my definition wrong if you can't show it. So what are they? They're just descriptions.
That's his point. Hold on, that's his point, Ram. So you asked what the phenomena is. That's what Brian's saying. If you can't show it, you can describe it. If we can't show the phenomena of unicorn excretion, yeah. Well, if you can't show it, but you describe it mathematically, and I describe it differently to Brian's description of unicorn digestion, it matters not if neither of you can show it. So whose description's right? Well, there isn't a phenomena, as you correctly ask. What's the phenomena? Well, there isn't one.
Right. So let me push that one step further and say, right, I've got a scientific body here that wants to study the unicorn excretion system, and we want $100 million to do it. Can we have that money, please? Yes, sure. There's taxpayers' money to go and research it. Does that not piss anybody off?
Yeah, I understand that point.
Quite like unicorns.
My daughter would be so happy
that science just gets like an unlimited pot of money, and it's all taxpayers' money.
They get triggered just because a couple of people like the idea of a bit of a science, club for unicorns. Me and John are contemplating this idea. Just leave us to it for a sec. What do you reckon?
Check, Tony, before I spend that money. The scientists studying the unicorn, will they be traveling there by a wardrobe or car?
It'll be done mathematically, and you can think that it's been done through a car or a wardrobe if you want, but actually it's just going to be done in maths.
Why are you speaking? You wanted to do away with this. Would there be funding for a wardrobe-based transport system?
I think so.
Listen, guys,
hold on. I'm just trying to establish what the funding situation is, Anthony. So if it was funding for a wardrobe-based system, obviously that would be, let's call it experimental, and therefore there would actually be a necessity for a car fund too. So I'm going to say wardrobe-based travelling system, if that's good by you, because then that will classed as the thing we're inquiring about, and we can get funding for that, and then we'll have obviously put the travelling expenses as cars separate. Cool.
May I add something?
As long as you're not trying to get funding for my wardrobe research.
No, just hang in there, Nathan. I'll get to it. Sipping Warrior and I talked a while back ago, and he said it before. And just confirm this, yes or no. In Einstein's version, the Earth is going up. Is that right?
Well, that's his equivalence principle, isn't it? He says that the apple doesn't actually accelerate down because gravity is not a force. Earth is traveling along its geodesic path, and it is traveling in the upwards direction at a rate of 9.8 meters per second squared, and the apple fails to conserve its momentum and appears to fall to the ground, but it doesn't actually. It's the Earth that rises up to the apple because the apple fails to conserve its momentum.
Okay, I think this is a main point they're trying to hide, because if you're on the ball, what's happening antipodal to you if it's going up?
Exactly.
And so this is more embarrassing for them than anything.
Hold on. I love how you get into how the begging the question mathematics is nonsensical. Sorry, your description that Einstein gave, Anthony, had an Earth as a sphere with a journey. You said about it travelling, correct?
Yeah.
And the path of that journey was along a geodesic, correct?
Yeah.
And that would be the bent concept within pseudo-Riemannian space-time. Fourth dimensional space-time bending would be the path, correct?
Yeah, but we can demonstrate it with a bedsheet.
Sorry, just let me get clarity. The Earth, according to this description, travelling up towards the apple, is taking a path along a conceptual fourth dimensional bent geodesic, correct?
Yeah.
Can you travel in a concept, Anthony?
No, but we can calculate it.
Can you physically travel through a concept?
No, but you can think that you can.
Why you need the wardrobes?
Yeah, the bed. The bed
right.
cover story.
Wardrobe research will supersede the research about a travel. That would be a path through a geodesic in bending space-time.
Well, here's the thing, Nathan. If you give me $1.1 billion, I'll be able to tell you how we can do it.
How you can show? how you can show a reified mathematical fourth dimension in a three-dimensional actuality. You think that you can throw money at physicalization of a fourth dimension? You think that's possible with LIGO?
We just need some funding to prove it. We'll send a probe up there and we'll come back with some telemetry data and we won't lose it, we promise.
You know what I need? I need at least 10 times that to discover the fifth dimension. And I can show that the fifth dimension has also got a curve in it, right? I mean, I'll just invent a new dimension and study that and find the curve in that dimension I've invented. So LIGO is essentially investigating the bending of a dimension that doesn't exist. A conceptual dimension that only exists in maths, and they're looking for a bend in that, are they? Give it another 10 billion.
I've got to give a shout out to George Musa. His PhD thesis was written on the convection currents of Venus, right? Think about that. Convection currents of Venus, a light in the sky for all we can tell, right? No one knows what it is. It just appears to be a light, but they can tell you about the convection currents beneath its surface. Really? How did somebody get a thesis out of that and a PhD?
Hang on, can we get back to my point here?
Just before we do, his thesis was based on a second law of thermodynamics violation. How much attention was the second law of thermodynamics given in Mr. Musa's thesis?
Well, he's a theoretical physicist, so he's allowed to violate laws of thermodynamics in the theoretical world, but you can think it's real world.
Yeah, but that's why he was able to say that there's convection currents, because he's able to then, at any point he needs to, claim a force of gravity is keeping these gases or whatever on Venus.
But he only did his calculations up to the Venusian Kármán line.
Well, isn't that the reason that?
No,
isn't that the reason that?
He's not wrong.
The reason that George.
I just want to say what Adam said didn't slip through very well. He's saying he's calculating it up to the Venetian Kármán line, which would be the arbitrary position where the gas doesn't fill the space, in spite of natural law dictating that the gas on Venus, in a presupposed orbit, in a presupposed second law of thermodynamics violation sky vacuum, when it's in fact just a light in our sky, all those things notwithstanding, he would have to have a Kármán line and gravity to make his assertion that stands in violation of the second law. Yes, Adam, correct.
Well,
go ahead.
He also needs R, funnily enough.
Yeah, he'd also need our twin. Yeah, it's definitely going to need R when they've asserted that Venus is the same size as Earth based on Earth's R value being assumed and superimposed onto Venus as a light in the sky, as a sphere, in a presupposed orbit in a sky vacuum. John, go ahead.
Adam stole half my point. But,
20 and 10.
But hold on a sec. I just wanted to say that with Newtonian mechanics, they invented an imaginary force to hold everybody on the ball. Einsteinian mechanics is about inventing a new reality to hold everybody on the ball.
Correct. A completely new dimension. Pseudo-Riemannian force space-time bending, and then the search for that bent, whatever they're going to call it, gravitational field or whatever they're claiming to look for in LIGO. They're looking for something that exists in a conceptual medium that's been invented by Einstein on paper in maths. So because Einstein's invented a dimension in maths, they're now going to look for it with billions of dollars of equipment. It's absolutely pathetic.
And all the geniuses back then, nobody could pull his card on this. Ridiculous.
No, because wardrobe funding is very, very tempting.
Well,
I'm sorry, where was all the educated people?
The consensus of my daughters is that you should definitely move forward with this unicorn investigation.
Just on 10's point, right? Their explanation for this that I've seen is that the Earth is always expanding out the way. So technically our globe is always expanding out the way in all directions. But this expansion out the way is counteracted by the curvature of space-time that is always curving in the way. So it's like that's why he's able to make that claim. So mathematically, the curvature of space-time is always curving in the way while the globe Earth is expanding out the way. That is what they say. That was the basics I've seen from PhDs.
Can I give the counter to that?
What you can, as I add in fourth dimensional pseudo-Ramonian force space, right, Brian? That's when this is actually, or where this is actually occurring?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
The point I was getting to.
It was just let Sleeping Warrior respond.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sleeping Warrior.
But I haven't finished. I haven't finished what I was
Oh,
saying.
okay.
Yes. Yeah. The point I was trying to get to, I gave that description, is because that is just another description of the same thing that they can't define and show. It's just more descriptions, the same way as if we describe how deep underneath the skin the unicorn horn goes. We can describe it as 1 inch, 2 inches, 2.5 inches. We can describe it all day, but we can't show it. So we can't define it.
So when you were saying about the explanation for how it is on the other side of the ball that the space-time is compensating, that same compensation happens on this side too. So whilst they have the ball on the bed sheet and it's showing the dimple, the weight of the ball bending the fabric of the space-time that it's sitting on, the exact opposite is also happening above it. So there is no directionality to this, yet they show it with a distortion that is only created in one direction. But that's happening equally in all infinite vectors all the way around that sphere. And it's always doing, in other words, there is an F net equals 0 position where there isn't any actual, everything's equal and opposite all the way around it. So they explain it with a one-dimensional perspective, but don't tell you that that's happening in all directions equally at all times. In other words, it doesn't explain the problem that they're trying to explain, only if they do it in the one dimension.
But no, hold on. I'm sorry, Tenth. You've been trying to get in for a while. I'm sorry.
Go on, Tenth.
No, go ahead. I'll finish after you.
I was just going to say that they do give it a direction. They're saying that the orbit of Earth is giving it an inertial vector, and whether that, you'll hear them say that it's an inertial force. You ever heard that?
Yes.
Yeah. So they're saying that the motion around the sun, which we're not moving around the sun, we're not on a ball. This is all silly.
Yes, it's an expansion of the claim after the cause and effect relationship's laid down. So cause, uneven distribution of mass; effect, bending of space-time; effect, after the effect, the force that it isn't. So they have a force from a non-force. Go ahead, Tenth.
Okay, so my opinion on this is they haven't been programmed until they get out of all the grade schools until university. So they need the programming time with Newton. If they were to introduce Einstein at the grade levels, pun intended, it will show how far the lie goes.
Right. With that, I'm going to say, if you are watching this on either Nathan Oakley 1980 or Nathan Oakley Premiering streams, then stay tuned, as there will be an after show to follow. Unfortunately, if you are watching this live, this is where we bid you farewell. So a huge, massive, enormous thank you to all of you who liked, commented, shared, subscribed, hit the PayPal link, and all that good stuff. Also, below this video, you can get £50 for swapping your UK electricity supplier to Octopus Energy, and this is of particular note if you drive an electric vehicle. I've been Nathan Oakley. Stay tuned if you're watching on a premiering stream, and I will see you all in the next video.
What a lovely day!
And what's CERN? What are they doing at CERN?
Not enough Globers coming in. Like, where are the Globers, man? Like, they used to be
They're
here all
hiding,
the time
Tommy.
with
They're
the
hiding.
I'll tell Tommy where they're at. The debate's actually over.
Yep.
That they just need to realize it, and they kind of do. That's why they're not here, because they ain't got shit.
They can't go in because Nathan won't let them beg the question. We know the fallacy of debate now. We know that if they beg the question, it's going to get stopped immediately. And they know that they can't beg the question in here. That's why Jose's show exists, so that they can beg the question.
And they have to beg the question. Otherwise,
yes.
they got no argument.
Every
Can I
globe
just
claim,
expand on?
Is our firewall.
every globe claim starts with begging the question. Go, Brian.
Yeah, I'd like to just expand on what John was saying at the end of the last show, and that whole orbit thing. Just give me 2 minutes, right? The whole orbit thing for the globe around the sun, right? The solar orbit is the solar analemma, which was created by Kepler when he took the original geocentric solar movements and he amalgamated it, back engineered it into the Copernican solar model. And that was like, he died, I think it was 117 years before Isaac Newton was even born. And it was after Isaac Newton's time that they started claiming that the reason that the globe Earth went around the sun was because of a force of gravity. So as it got closer to the sun, it sped up, as it was slowed down as it was further away from the sun. This is their claim, right? Now, what John was saying there about Einstein and about the motion of the globe Earth around their central sun, that would cause a difference in the effect we're supposed to observe, because that motion changes day to day, and we should have two completely contrasting effects. Let's just say on December 21st and June 21st, or what they're aphelion and perihelion. That's what they claim, right? This Forreston. So either on the solstices or on the perihelion and or on perihelion and aphelion, like we should have two contrasting effects, within that, because the motion is not a constant motion.
Well, hold on. No, within a three-dimensional paradigm, that would be correct. But all they would have to say is that within the fourth dimension, its path is constant. And they could mathematically show you that it was.
Well, if it's constant, it can't be moving at different velocities.
It can on a
No,
geodesic.
a circle is
a
circle
geodesic.
is
That's his point.
Right.
It can on its geodesic path through space-time. That's his point.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that, but it doesn't really matter whether I'm right or wrong.
None of us agree with it. Hold on, let's just clear that up. None of us agree that there is a path on a concept. It's nonsense.
Yeah, that's my point, is once you're into the begging the question fallacy, pulling apart stuff in there, like they can tape it up however they want to. That's what we all found when we got to the globe, is a model in shambles, but it's still being held together by people's beliefs.
Correct. But you can quickly dispense with it. Show me space-time.
Well, my point when I brought up Newton and Einstein, and if they taught what Einstein taught at the early levels, this goes back to the student being curious and yet to be programmed, would say, how could that be? One hand, you're saying it's this. On the other hand, you're saying it's this. And it seems like that's a concept. They can't have that happen. So that's why they wait.
Yeah.
Well, there was something subtle I threw in there that I was hoping someone would catch on to, but they didn't. Their claim is a force of gravity brings their globe around the sun. What is the claim in Einsteinian description?
That it follows a geodesic path in space-time.
What causes that to do that?
The uneven distribution of mass.
But that only causes the curvature.
No, you have gravitational accretion forming the order that we have in the solar system.
Explain that.
Gravitational accretion?
Yes.
Exactly as it sounds. The formation of a rock from nothing. So when you have the pillars of creation, they're a description in heliocentric Einsteinian mathematics of the mass of those gases coming together to form, potentially, a star. That's gravitational accretion.
And how does that cause movement?
Once you've got orbital motion through the accretion and the travelling through a geodesic in space-time.
How do you get the movement in the first place?
Because of the gravitational attraction, this is your point, to the sun as it falls around it in an orbital motion.
It doesn't have an interaction.
No, hold on. No, that's not it. It would be
It
the
doesn't have an
initial.
interaction to the.
It'd be the initial input of energy within the system. That would be what the response would be, and how do you prove them wrong?
What initial
actually,
input of energy?
Can I just correct some?
Let's just,
Can I
just answer
correct some
John's
of the-
question. How do you prove them wrong? Sorry, do you want to show me space-time so that we can get to grips with this path that we can travel along it in? Just show me that
What I'm
fourth
saying
dimensional
is-
conceptual dimension, please. Can you show me that? If you can't, then this isn't reality.
That's my point though. Like, if you're going to dig into it, they can say anything. Really, you're arguing in a concept. They can invent anything at that point.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's got to be done though. Just to give, we'll introduce you back in a second, Sleeping Warrior. To get to the level of understanding and knowledge where you can appreciate that you have to accept certain things and disregard certain things and move along paths with certain burdens, you've got to get into it whilst begging the question. I hate it. I can't do it. Anthony, bless his soul, can. He can get into the paradigm and work within the paradigm, and you have to make some sort of progress. If the discussion on the live show doesn't show that, then I don't know what would. Those kind of contemplations are only there because Anthony's got into their paradigm, begged the question alongside them, and worked through their issues within their paradigm. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you or I can't stop that at any time just by saying, what's space-time again? Oh, a conceptual fourth dimensional medium that only exists in maths. That's the end of this discussion. Yeah, but Anthony has got an exemplary knowledge, probably better than anybody I know, because of him begging the question. In the face of me telling him not to and screaming at him and yelling him not to and demanding that he doesn't and calling him an idiot for doing so, he's tolerated all of it, and now his exceptional knowledge has only come as a result of that. Sometimes you have to beg the question. I will accept it. I was wrong.
Let me just point out, Nathan, where you do beg the question, and you do it with Coriolis better than anyone I know. I don't like the Coriolis argument because I see it the way that with the disdain that you see the other arguments with. I don't like the Coriolis argument. It's nonsense. But you do beg the question with them. You argue it well, and you argue it consistently, coherently, and people do generally understand it. Might not be able to argue it themselves, but at least understand that there is an opposing argument, and you do that. So it's not true that you hate doing it, because you seem to enjoy it when it comes to Coriolis.
Not really.
Well, the Coriolis effect is real, though. Sorry, Nathan.
Well, no, I think what Anthony's saying is when I talk about how you'd have to retain 1,000 miles an hour rim velocity as you violate the first law of thermodynamics, taking off a spinning sphere, I am begging the question alongside them while I detail their own paradigm. I wouldn't call it begging the question, I'd call it detailing their own paradigm back to them, explaining their begging the question fallacy. It seems that way, and I'm glad you've said it, Anthony, because often I'll get charged, and I was with that last guy, I'm going to publish that tomorrow, by the way, when I point out what Coriolis is as a globe claim, he says, I'm not claiming Coriolis, you are. And it's like, no, I'm not. I'm pointing out how you have a Coriolis on your globe Earth so I can pull it apart. Very similar to Einstein. They deny their own Coriolis and substitute in Globiolus effect. Thank you very much indeed, Brian's logic. And that's what they'll do with Einsteinian and Newtonian gravity. They will refuse to accept what is actually claimed to be their gravity. In this case, there's a defined actual fact. You can see Coriolis from a roundabout. Look at anything not attached. Seems like it's moving, right? It isn't. You are. Simple. So that's a real effect. They say the real effect's on Earth, so I have to detail how they say it's on Earth so they can deny it. Then I get into explaining again how they actually are supposed to be claiming it, and they claim I'm claiming it. With Einstein, similar thing. You point out how your current paradigm is Einstein. So I want to pummel it by pointing out we don't have a fourth dimension. It only exists in the maths. But they don't. They deny their own paradigm because it's not taught to them in schools, the whole crux of this conversation, and tell you that, no, we've got a force. There's a force of gravity. I know there's a force. I was told it. How could I have been lied to? Isn't what they're saying. They just understand that as fact. It isn't. It's 106 years out of date.
You don't have to be...
Go on, Ted, I'll go after it.
Yeah, I'll be short. You don't have to be a long-time listener to this debate platform of yours to find out that everything and anything that is essential for their globe model, they are denying.
Anti-flat earthers, that's how they got the label, yeah. They deny their own claim in order to be able to defend our rebuttal. So we point out nothing's turning underneath something in the air as claimed by the globe Earth Coriolis claim, and they say we don't claim that something should be drifting away from you at 15 degrees an hour as per the globe claim of Coriolis. Nothing should be drifting, there shouldn't be any effect to see. That is what the anti-flat earthers will tell us. It's like, no, your claim is actually 15 degrees an hour. I'm not claiming that, you are, Mr. Flat Earther. No, I'm not, that globe's claiming, and so it goes on.
Yeah, but that's the thing, you see, if you believe in the globe model, then whether you like it or dislike it, the Coriolis effect is part of that model. It has to be there, it has to be shown. And the proof of this is that we are told we see the stars, sun and moon, right, move in the sky due to the rotation of the Earth underneath us. Right? That's Coriolis effect. So they want to deny the Coriolis effect between the surface of their globe and space. They don't want to deny it after that. They only want to deny that bit, because that's the bit in reality. That line that determines whether their claim is correct or incorrect. And that shows it to be completely incorrect, because planes would have shorter flight times flying against their rotation. But they don't, because we're not rotating.
Right, and as we lay out these actual claims that the globe has and how they're contradicted by actual reality observations, it just leaves our anti-flat earth opponents in cognitive pain. You know, somebody explained a couple of days ago about how Zinda hasn't returned because it was just too much for him on the globe side. It was becoming too stressful. Well, these are the reasons and whys and wherefores of why on the globe side this is very distressing for you. If you're a glober listening to this now, we know how stressful it is for you. We get told how stressful it is for you. None of us are experiencing that stress on this side. The only stress we have to deal with is your projection of your stress onto us. Other than that, that's not real stress. It's just your projected stress.
There's a lot of projection in this subject.
No, I was just going to add, it's the whole time, you know, the past couple of weeks that I've been on here, I've noticed that they'll deny the claims and then they'll throw in reification fallacies by saying, oh, well, let's see how it'll work on an AE map, or let's see how it works on your paradigm. But we're examining your claims here, not ours. We never made the claim of an AE model or anything like that. You're basing your reality based on the model.
Yeah, you're summarising one of QE's recent points, which is the most part of the anti-flat earth arguments start with a stereotyping fallacy. Again, to example, the guy who came on recently who was looking for Bitcoin, he said, well, I've watched some videos and therefore dome and therefore firmament. It's like, so basically stereotyping fallacies then. Flat earthers all say that we've got X, Y, and Z, therefore you must now defend that point. No. I just rip apart your globe claim.
I think we've got.
I'll make a claim. Sextant could only work on the flat Earth.
Great claim. It's true. Can't get an angle on a sphere.
I think we've got to accept that we've got to start ramming this Einsteinian nonsense down their throat, because they've got to accept that the science is not Newton anymore. Whether they agree with that or not, it isn't Newton anymore. It's an objective fact that it is Einsteinian, right? And we don't even like this, right? But we've got to start pushing this, because they've got to start accepting that Newton's gone. Well, the only silver lining to that is that gravity's not a force anymore, but we've got to start reifying mathematics, but we can cross that bridge at a later point.
What?
Let's get them off Newton.
Well, you've found a cornerstone, Anthony. The reason that's hard to budge is because it's a cornerstone. We've just detailed how all of the claims have got a band-aid of gravity. If it's a force, strapped over the top when there's an issue. As soon as you relinquish the idea in a child's mind that there's an actual force pulling or pushing stuff, then there's no band-aid to put on all the problems that a kid will raise when this is being indoctrinated into them. So you can't remove that cornerstone. As much as we say it's just red tape that's getting in the way, yeah, there's a whole building. In fact, there's a whole institution built on that one cornerstone.
Oh, hold on a
If
second.
you try and take it away, they'll want to replace it straight away.
No, I don't think they
I don't-
can.
I don't
That's
wanna
what.
take away-
That's the problem with removing a cornerstone. You can't just shove a load of sand underneath it and hope it'll be okay. You've compromised the foundation.
The cornerstone is only there because there is a foundation, and that foundation is a geometric horizon.
Correct.
But I want to go back to Tent's point about when the claim that's being made, because we're not claiming a model with the sextant, because nobody is saying there's an actual distance to the stars. So there's no model being claimed. I don't think it would be. I think it would be fallacious to try to say that we're holding on to a model. We're just discussing apparent geometry.
Yeah, don't delude yourself. We might be doing that in this tiny channel in a tiny corner of the internet. Meanwhile, there is a whole controlled opposition narrative in the form of something called the Flat Earth Society that tells you about what the flat earthers believe and presents the model that the flat earthers have, with boats falling over the edge, so that the flat earthers can be ridiculed for the weakest element of the actual argument that the globers have when they have boats falling over the edge of the geometric horizon Brian just pointed out the foundation of this institution is based on, with a cornerstone of gravity.
But yeah, I wasn't saying that for the benefit of globers. I was saying that to the benefit of anybody that's asking reasonable questions about this subject.
Indeed.
We can make claims. Like, we can claim that sextants prove the Earth to be flat. Air travel proves the Earth to be flat. Things like that. We can make those claims and positively back them.
That reminds me.
With either... Sorry?
Go ahead.
I'm just saying, yeah, we can make claims and back them. We can do that. We don't do it, but maybe we should start doing it.
Oh, I do now, with the sextant. I think it's that strong. Up until now, I didn't. I pretty much exclusively use that as my flat Earth proof now. I know it's relatively fledgling or young in terms of our utilisation of the argument, but if someone says, what proves the Earth's flat? I'd say plain sailing, celestial navigation, the sextant. You'll like this, 10th. I was watching Bev try thinking. He is all over this like flies on shit. And he's hauling the globers over the coal, multiples of them, who, I don't know why they see Bev as a weak target, but they all pummel in. And he's just hauling them over the coals with, guess what, 90 degrees. It's absolutely brilliant to watch. And some of his commenters, I was about to take credit as though it was one of my comments. I'm pretty sure I read this comment in Bev's comment section. You'll like this. Someone said, yeah, you can't do curve angulation. I thought that was brilliant.
Bendizontal and curve angulation. Love it.
Curve where are you going to get your angle for curve angulation? What gives you your angle in curve angulation? Yeah, you need a vertex. You need two straight lines, something you haven't got on a globe in any way, shape or form.
There's only one place in their globe model that they have to go to get a vertex, and that's the center of their globe model. That's the only place. You can't get it on the surface. But where's the sextant being used? On the surface. It can't work because it's curved. It's over.
I'd love to know.
That was one of the. I was going to say that was one of the big things that kept me in heliocentrism was the tangent to the horizon. You know, I never thought about it critically. I just kind of accepted it, that it had been measured. I didn't measure it myself. That's probably the reason I accepted it. But, you know, that was the straight line. And then the black swan come along, you know, and just crapped all over that.
Yep.
Well, if they were taking an angle from the center of a pre-assumed globe, besides the whole radius obvious black swan issue, then they wouldn't be doing a horizon dip correction, because it would be an absolutely pointless waste of time. That's like me going to hoover the house, and I'm also going to do something completely innate, you know, before I hoover. every time.
But this is what they feel like. This is what I mean. Like, it's rocket scientists and all that. He looks at telemetry data and like satellite data. So he must be doing something, knowing it could potentially be fake, and just he pretending he's doing something. And that's what a lot of people are doing. So they're going to defend it. Like, no, they did a life's
No.
work. All these things, satellites
When-
can't be false, like GPS systems and all that.
When studying this topic, I kept saying the word circle, circle this, circle that, circle that. I don't see sphere. I see circle. They're working with a two-dimensional circle. And the orthographic view is that from the center, straight up is your zenith. And then to the equator of that circle is your right angle, which is, they divide the circle into 4 sections of 90s. They're just working with a two-dimensional drawing and saying, here's a right angle 90. And then if you go from here to there, that's 30 degrees. Well, that is not a sphere. That is just on a piece of paper, two-dimensional. When you get on a sphere, you actually, if they believe they're on a sphere and they're holding a sextant, it can never work. It could never work. And yet it does work. And it works because the Earth is a flat plane to give you the baseline to a star's GP that's thousands of miles away. That just proves it right there.
This is why it was so important that that Brian got so pissed at all of us when he was trying to explain the significance of the dip angle correction, because it takes it from a measurement that you're taking that could have all sorts of atmospheric conditions, if I beg the question of a sphere, and I'm going to play the fundy in this example. But ultimately speaking, you've got a correction that's defined in terms of the height correction and how it's taking it down to the surface. But what does that actually do in terms of what you're doing mathematically? It takes it to pure geometry. No longer are you dealing with anything to do with curved, refracted. It's pure geometry so that you can do the triangulation. So when you do the dip correction, you're then taking it to the point where you can say, I can now state this mathematically as a straight, flat line along the surface. But that's only possible after you've taken it to the pure geometry that is the triangulation on a flat surface. So doing the horizon dip correction, actually a height adjustment to bring your triangulation down to the surface, that takes it to pure, flat, most importantly, geometry. That's what you're doing. So Brian was, very much justified in shutting us all down, telling us how stupid we were for not saying it or seeing the significance of doing the dip correction. In reality, at the time, I was arguing, well, it's not that important if you're on a boat. You're only about 10 feet above the ground. Who cares? So you could just do it without, and the tiny, tiny insignificant error wouldn't really matter in terms of you actually sailing towards whatever piece of land you're trying to aim for. But Brian's point, because I was missing it at the time, was, no, even if it's a foot above the ground, by doing that foot and correcting for the foot that your sextant is above the sea level in this instance, you're then making it a purely geometric calculation with a triangle. And what's a triangle going to have in that pure geometry? A flat baseline to the GP of the star thousands of miles away.
Let me comment on that, because that's all the stuff that the sextant books and navigation books tell you must do, is to height of eye to the sea level, minus that 10 feet, 14 feet. So if they're telling you it's important, that's how the tool works properly. When they don't do it, it's going to get them off course by so many number of miles, whatever, which also proves the validity of the sextant. If you don't do it properly, you're going to miss it. If you do it properly, flat baseline, you're going to be on it. Both of them actually prove how the instrument works.
Well, do you want to hear the argument and why I believe it was a ball after the argument with the dip angle? Because I think Brian did hit the nail on the head. They're conflating two different things. Because their dip angle is they draw a zenith through their head, make an imaginary 90 degrees out, and they call it that horizontal. And then they use like a theodolite to measure a difference between that line and where the horizon is. And then the argument that they would say is, well, if I take my position 10 feet above the water down to the ground and put myself in the ground, half of my eye will be covered up by the physical geometry of Earth. and that's what the horizon is. And that's what a lot of people get tricked by.
Well, they got a problem
I think John has gone to say.
Yeah, you can follow up. They got a problem there because all these books also say it needs to be a right angle. Now, what's a right angle?
Two straight lines.
That's the imaginary line that they're drawing, though. Back before the Black Swan, when they would say they were taking a tangent to the horizon, it was the difference between that straight line from their eye to the horizontal they got from their plumb. And the difference between that, they were using straight lines up until a year and a half ago. I don't know why I know why they're changing their position, because if they want to hold that it's still a sphere, they got to say it's like bigger than friggin' Jupiter.
Before Brian goes, I like to say 2 words they use a lot: perpendicular and right angle. They screw themselves when they do that. Go on, Brian.
Thank you, Ten. Sorry, I stepped on you there twice. I apologize. I'm a bit overzealous. No, I think, John, you're missing my point. The point being, if I believe I'm on a globe and I take an angle, right, and my angle is from the star to the horizon of view, right, why would I ever do an horizon dip correction if I'm just going to pre-assume that that angle is starting at the center of a pre-assumed globe? Because the horizon dip correction would make no sense. I wouldn't do it because the curve of the Earth, the hump of the Earth, whatever, would be in my way. It would make no sense, and the reason I'm bringing it to the center is because the horizon dip correction is pointless. But they do horizon dip correction because that's how they get their angle.
Well,
do you understand what I mean?
Yes, but they're trying to say that the horizon, the Earth is so big that the horizon is a good approximation for horizontal, which is
but you're missing my point. You're missing my point. I take an angle, right? Right. I pretend I'm on a globe. I take an angle with the sextant. Right. I have this, what would be a curved line to the horizon, right, and a line up to the star, right. Why would I be bothered about what height I am above the water below me when I'm just going to bring the angle way down below that, almost 4,000 miles below that, to the center of a pre-assumed sphere? Why would horizon dip correction ever be a thing? It would never be a thing.
It wouldn't. Yeah. The moment you take it to the center of a pre-spherical Earth, it's no longer relevant. On screen, we've got Al-Biruni's horizon dip calculation, and the confusion comes because they've both got the same term. So you're both calling this horizon dip correction. Well, the dip angle measurement that's being made by Al-Biruni is from A to C in this diagram. Well, that's got nothing to do with a height correction for a straight flat baseline. It's not even labelled. I think they call this the sensible horizon. Nevertheless, on this line along the top, that's what you're going to be utilising for the triangulation with the sextant. And the dip correction is from A to B in this diagram. And all you're doing is lowering your height above the ground that you're measuring. And the ground is going to be considered to be this top line, which would be a flat line for triangulation. So the dip correction in triangulation is to account for your height above the ground, A to B in Al-Biruni's diagram, excluding and ignoring all spherical surfaces below. You're trying to get the flat line down to the ground. That's all a dip correction is for a sextant. Nothing to do with a dip from a sensible horizon to a geometric horizon that only exists in the maths and has been debunked by the Black Swan. The two are not connected. They're just, obviously, for this very reason, have the same name.
Nathan, I posted...
That's what I was saying. But that's what I'm saying, is they've conflated terms. On purpose, probably. I don't know if it's on purpose.
Absolutely, without question, it's on purpose. Yes, without doubt.
Yes. Nathan, I posted 3 slides. I shared on Monday. If you can put them up, and I'll be quiet until they come up.
Yeah, just before Tent speaks on these slides, if you remember, Dr. Bob's whore, right, was the joke whore, but Bob's whore, what he was terming as the horizon, that he was putting a dip angle down to, right, from his eye line on his diagram, right, his orthographic diagram.
No, that's not correct. No, the whore wasn't his horizon. And that,
no, sorry, right, sorry. The whore was
horizontal.
His astronomical HOR, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. But the point is, in his diagram, right, he showed a dip angle to the horizon, right, on his globe, on his orthographic globe. And that's why when I asked him about it, he said, yeah, he's tilting the lens of the sextant down to the waters, right, to where the horizon is, right, below his position on a boat, right? But why would you, my point is, you would never, that's what he's calling a horizon dip correction. But he's missing the point of that is a completely pointless thing to do if you just kind of bring the angle from your eye line down to the center of a globe. You would never do that. It would be it's like getting into your car to go drive it, and then before you go driving it, you take your coat and put it on backwards. Like, why? Like, what has that got to do with anything? It has nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, it's part of the bait and switch, though, isn't it? So taking your angle to Polaris involves you taking the angle from the ground, the straight line to its GP, and then measuring the angle that it sits at above the horizon. Two straight lines meeting at a vertex to give you the angle. In their diagram, they've pushed that angle down to the centre of a presupposed spherical Earth, making the horizon viewing in the sextant completely irrelevant. Because you're no longer taking your eye line to the ground, you're taking the protractor to the centre of a presupposed spherical Earth that doesn't exist. It's got sod all to do with a horizontal line that's being formed by the sextant, and everything to do with their presuppositional angle that's going to be twisted through the centre of a sphere. So it's benign when they make their claim. Why is it in the diagram? Well, because it's actually being viewed in the sextant. That's why. It doesn't need to be there if you've got a presupposed sphere, and that's where the angle's being taken from. That's Brian's point.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I agree. But the let me see if I parallax, how they claim an infinite distance. That's why they do that, so they can claim that the way you would perceive it from the center of Earth would be no different than from the outside edge. But the thing that still kills them is the triangles need straight lines. And
Here, John, I'll kill him. I'll kill him, John.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Nathan, you got slides up.
Got navigation up first, the title.
Yeah, I showed this on Monday. This is Harold Jacoby, chair of Columbia Astronomy Department. I've ordered this book. If you go to the next slide, let me read chapter 6 on the sextant. We have twice made reference to this instrument, once page 5 as a contrivance for ascertaining by observation how high the sun is in the sky, and again on page 59 in measurement of the danger angle. These two uses of sextant are not inconsistent, for it really intended for the measurement of any angle, page 8, formed at the observer's eye by two lines drawn to distant objects, not the center of the Earth. In the case of the danger angle, these two distant objects are landmarks ashore. In the case of the sun, they are the horizon line, where the sea and sky seem to meet, and the sun itself. This height of the sun, or of any star, in the sky is called its altitude. And so the altitude is always an angle to be measured in degrees and minutes. The point directly overhead is the zenith. The angle between lines drawn to horizon and zenith is 90 degrees, or a right angle. Last slide. That's how a sextant works. But doesn't that picture tell you it can't work on the globe? Pretty embarrassing.
I think Brian's right about it being stupidity, though, or not stupidity, ignorance. I think it was just ignorance. But who was teaching the people?
It. I mean, I would love to hear a Globe defend it, because at this point, it's hard to see why they can even try that. It's like it would be entertaining just to hear one. Even Makuma virus at this point, just hearing him just ignoring obvious points that are contradictory in his own rhetoric. Like, even I was arguing yesterday about like gas pressure without a container. I was saying, well, when you pop a balloon inside of a vacuum, what happens to the contained gas? Does that go to the floor? Because you've done about helium balloons go to the bottom of a vacuum chamber. And I go, yeah, that's true. When they're contained in a solid material, they'll have a downward bias like most solid materials do. Solids and liquids are not we're not contending that point. What about gases in their natural state? So there's like, oh, what happens in a helium balloon? Well, helium balloon goes to the bottom of the floor. But what happens when you pop the balloon? The balloon expands in all directions, doesn't it? And he didn't want to concede the point because that point proves that entropy will increase and therefore the atmosphere that we have would go out into space. Regardless of gravity. If gravity was the case, then when we look at the cosmos, why are they
Spot
expanding?
on, by the
Why
way,
all that
Tommy. Yes,
hydrogen?
indeed. Spot on.
What you're describing, Tommy, is very good, but it just proves that this is their religion and they don't want to let go, even in lieu of facts and reason.
Well, I think it's heaped in so many contradictions because they want to hold both positions simultaneously and make their position undebunkable, you know?
If we lived on a sphere,
for me,
the
if I
black
can't
swan
argue,
would
right,
not.
if I could prove something, right, if I could prove that the Earth was globe, and I was in this debate room now, I'd bring it to the table and I'd try and argue it, but because I can't actually formulate a proper good way to prove the globe, you know, I stand humble until further notice. Do you know what I mean? It's not like I wouldn't argue it if I had an argument, but I actually think that there hasn't been an argument I heard really that's really been like a nail in the coffin.
If we lived on a
So unless
sphere, the black swan would not exist.
Exactly, the black swan is amazing. I mean, the whole scenery to refract over the curvature and to appear to be flat, and that's how they know it's curved because it just looks flat. That we know it's curved because it looks flat, and that really just grinds my gears. That they have that kind of common sense to their own dimension. That happens to be the light bends just perfectly to make scenery look as if that it's flat. You know, it just happened to be the curvature of the Earth. It refracts over and gives you this appearance that you can see further than you should on a globe. And that to me just it's patronising. That's okay to believe, but maybe me believing that maybe it's not true is such a fucking horrible thing. Like that's another thing that don't make no sense either.
That's all right. Just take it as read, Tommy. Just say okay. So you're saying no straight lines to anything ever? Yes, sextant can't work on a globe. It requires straight lines as a fundamental principle of its operation. It requires a flat baseline. Line, straight, flat. Something you don't have if you're claiming everything's always refracted. The geometric horizon isn't actually capable of being seen ever, therefore it can't be measured and they can't get R. So in actual fact, Tommy, when they say refraction, it's the death nail of their argument. It's them conceding.
The initial argument forward, so maybe he can understand what we mean with the black swan, because the positive claim is they don't even like talk about it anymore. But there is a positive claim that comes with the globe that you can use tangential geometry to measure Earth's geometry.
Okay, Tommy. So what John's saying is the original claim. The original claim, Tommy, is that you can measure Earth a sphere, and in order to measure Earth a sphere, geometrically, you require straight lines, and they don't have them anymore when they say they're refracted. So they debunk their original claim that Earth could be a sphere because they've got geometric measurements. They aren't even capable of measuring it anymore. Hence, debunking
that's when
R.
you talk about terrestrial. That's when they insert terrestrial refraction to kind of like have it refracting around it.
No, because Tommy, terrestrial refraction includes R, and R is acquired by the geometry. That would mean straight line. So when they say, oh, well, I use terrestrial refraction, they mean they're bending the line. Well, if they're bending the line, they haven't got geometry anymore. They can't get R for terrestrial refraction to apply. This is known as the Arwinian paradox. You can't refract the horizon with R when the acquisition of R requires a geometric horizon with a straight line to it.
Yeah, it completely debunks their maths.
So they're debunking their own claim when they say refraction. That's the point.
It's refracted like they're trying to calculate.
Well, no. Let me tell you a little story. I went to QE with the same exact objection you're putting to us now, and he didn't smirk, but it's kind of makes the story make more sense if I describe it that way. He kind of smirked and went, I want them to say refraction, because their model is based on geometry. That would be based on being able to measure things with straight lines. The moment they say refraction, it's the end of their claim.
Well, a way of exampling this is, it's like me saying...
I haven't got that much confidence in it. Sorry, go on. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, just 1 second. It's like me saying that I'm buying something at the local gas station, but I haven't driven there to get it. I'm at home. So how can I claim to buy something there when it requires me going there to buy it? Like, their claim is they're buying something at the gas station, a gas station they haven't gone to yet to buy it.
Describing a
and
paradox.
They need...
You're butchering it. Let me do a better job.
Yeah, it sounds like
there's an island. There's an island that is only accessible by helicopter, and you tell your friends that you went to the island, and they say, "How did you get there?" And you go, "By the helicopter that I bought." And they go, "But you can only buy the helicopters on the island. You can only buy helicopters on the island. So how did you get to the island? With the helicopter." But you couldn't have got the helicopter unless you went to the island. I got to the island on the helicopter. But you didn't have the helicopter to get to the island. And so it goes on. You can't refract the horizon with R if R is acquired by the measuring of the horizon.
Yeah, and if you can't measure it, it's not real.
Right. And they tell us it's not real.
It's not real.
It only exists in the maths. So to quote Rumpus, Tommy, the geometric horizon only exists in the maths. End quote. The geometric horizon is Earth curve. It only exists in the maths. Earth curve only exists in maths because the horizon is an Earth curve. We can't see it by their own admission. We wouldn't expect to see the geometric horizon.
That's why I become skeptical of the globe, because I'm skeptical of it now. But to have the confidence that you say to follow through with it and say that it's completely debunked, therefore, we're definitely being lied to, it's definitely this, then that for me, I feel like I need more confidence in being able to be more assertive for that. And I just feel like I'm quite happy with just having reasonable doubt and saying that these arguments are, they sound contentious and there's weight to them. So that's kind of like where I sit really.
They're telling us, you, Tommy, cannot see Earth curve. It cannot be seen. It only exists on paper in the maths. Earth curve can't be seen. That's what our opponents have told us as a result of the Black Swan argument. That's their words to us. Now, they say geometric horizon and things like, we wouldn't expect to see the geometric horizon, end quote, AB science. That's their claim now. We wouldn't expect to see Earth curve. That's their rebuttal. Their fundamental claim is that Earth curve's the horizon, and they're telling us we can't see Earth curve, Tommy.
With the boat, remember the boats used to go over the horizon. What happened to that one?
Yeah,
Tommy,
they used to go over. They used to go over a geometric horizon, Tommy. Right, a physical obstruction, geometric in nature with a straight line drawn to it in the maths. They can't do that anymore. They haven't got a straight line to draw to claim that it's a physical geometric sphere edge to obstruct the boat. It's all refracted. So how are you going to acquire the geometry to make the assertion? Answer: you can't. Debunked.
That's why Q got to go over the Black Swan again. I'm sorry. This is
he was right for going over the Black. Right, but this is how claims work, right? You make a positive claim about reality, and then you have to show proof, right? They made a positive claim that we live on a ball, and the way you know is you can measure its geometry. Their rebuttal to the Black Swan is that nobody ever sees the geometry of Earth.
Perfect. With that, I'm going to say another huge, massive, enormous thank you to both Discord and G+ panels for making today's after show possible. Of course, a massive thank you to all of you in either Nathan Oakley 1980 or Nathan Oakley premiering streams for hopefully smashing the super chat, liking, commenting, sharing, subscribing, hitting the PayPal link, and all that good stuff. Also below this video, you can get £50 for swapping your UK electricity supplier to Octopus Energy. This is of particular significance if you drive an electric vehicle. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I will see you all in the next video.